Bars in a rave, man, I go hard like Santan.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome again to Chessy Hour. Another week, another installment of all things SW6, all things Stamford Bridge, all things Chelsea Football Club are coming from the Touchline Media Group and the Chessy Hour team. We are joined by the regulars this week, Jermaine, Dan, Pels, and no face, no case, Joe Tweed. But I'm not going to ask you how you are today. I usually do because we've got a nice guest joining us for this evening. Athletic staff writer who, in his own words, covers Chelsea and more. On it from his Twitter bio. We're going to focus on the former tonight in his involvement. Been covering Chelsea for about five years now in depth now, Liam.
Yeah. Well, Mourinho got sacked in my second week, so that's you can time it pretty effectively from that.
Baptism of fire. And Liam, I am going to just be open and honest with you, mate. I can already feel a few smiles coming. I had no idea how to pronounce the surname. I had to, I didn't want to get it wrong. So
nobody does.
I'm going to ask you two things. I'm going to ask you, number one, for the correct way, and number two, for the worst way it's ever been said to you.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, the way to remember it is just to think Chuckle Brothers, to me, to you. Twomey is the way it's said. It's an Irish name. There's two different spellings in Ireland as well, which doesn't make things any easier. It is quite an effective way, back in the days when people had landline phones, to weed out like unsolicited calls, basically. Because if they didn't know how to say my surname, I knew they didn't know me.
Well, welcome on the landline. Welcome.
Yeah, exactly. I think probably the worst pronunciation ever was from my American RE teacher in secondary school who said Twomey. I don't know where he got the A from.
Twomey.
I don't know where
that's a bit Ghanaian almost.
Yeah, that is Ghanaian.
That's an interesting one. Maybe they were. Well, I mean, good effort for saying it. They have more about them than I did to just ask.
Well, and he was calling up my parents to have a go about some work I hadn't done as well. So it made it even worse.
We got away with that one. I imagine it was a quick phone call, to be fair. They would have put the phone down pretty quick.
They were so insulted by the name that I didn't catch much heat. It's fine.
There we go. Protected. Brilliant. Well, yeah, thanks for joining us, Liam. And I think in this episode in particular, I think it'd be really cool to get some of your insight, especially from the season that we've just had, because tonight is going to be all about Lampard's season review, Lampard's performance as manager, Lampard's come dine with me-esque performance, because tonight we're not gonna just ebb and flow and discuss and share opinions and go round and roundabout. It's going to be a lovely little ranking system, as you might have seen on the famous dinner party show. Similarly to our alternative award show, we could just come out and say, yeah, Kovacic or Mount, or yeah, Lampard was good but can improve. No, we're going to do something a bit more fun, a little bit different. So yeah, thanks Liam for joining us, and really excited for it. Liam, also in one of your big pieces on The Athletic, you sort of talked about the madness of covering Chelsea. Mourinho's sacking in the second week aside, what has been the most surreal sort of moment of the coverage?
There are quite a few contenders. I think one of the ones that sticks in my mind again, because it was early on, was about 3 months after Mourinho got sacked. Me, Simon Johnson, actually, when he was at the Evening Standard, and about 3 other journalists were in a mix zone little huddle. And John Terry actually waited for us to finish talking to another player. I think it was Oscar, which doesn't happen in mix zones. Players don't wait for you. So we should have known something was up. And he sort of talked to him normal questions for about a minute, and then someone asked him, any latest on the contract, John? And he went into like a obviously pre-rehearsed speech about, it looks like I'm going to be leaving Chelsea. The club told me they're not renewing my contract. It's a really sad day, but I respect the decision, all this sort of thing. And we're just all standing there looking at each other like, what? And it was crazy. And Simon Johnson, who is like one of the most experienced mix zone operators I know, He's very rarely stumped for a follow-up question. And when Terry stopped talking, there was like a moment of silence, and Simon just went, "Well, how'd you feel?" just to try and keep him talking, because none of us knew what to say, and it turned out not be quite the earth-shattering story that we thought it was at the time, because he was politically lobbying the club in public to try and give him an extra year, and he ended up getting his way, and obviously left at the end of the Conte year when they won the league. But that was an early introduction to how mad covering Chelsea could be, because that was like really it should have been the quietest 6 months covering Chelsea possible, and it still ended up being absolute madness.
Very, very early gander into how political the club can be as well, and that I don't like the term player power, always almost lost meaning, but just how big those characters can be in terms of lobbying the club in public and everything like that. So yeah, really dived in there, Liam. A good first few weeks on the job. You've done well. But yeah, looking forward to getting into this. Tonight we are going to categorize some of these I guess areas in which a manager can be ranked. We might miss some out. I've tried to be as exhaustive as I possibly can. Just one more question, Liam, before we get into this. Who's the person you most dislike at the club currently? No, I'm not expecting you to answer that. Don't worry. But I thought I'd try it out. Right.
You got to pick someone that I'm not expecting to ask to talk to again. That's the way it works.
Batshuayi, maybe. Who knows? Right. So tonight I'm going to outline the category. I might direct it to you guys. I might be a free-for-all in true Touchline Fracas fashion. Unfortunately for Dan, Joe and Meads, who's not with us tonight, there is no designated section, especially how Lampard has handled Hudson-Odoi or Jorginho. I'm sorry, lads. You can do that on the Patreon. And yeah, have a little chat, and then I'm going to come round for the scores, and I'll keep an eye on the clock. So in terms of categorising how Lampard has performed, I think first I want to start just off the pitch a little bit. And this is one that we've discussed at different times on the podcast as well, because it's been noticeable in players' involvement and lack of involvement and little things like that. So number one, man management. How he has done in his first season at this sort of level in managing, no disrespect to Derby County, but players who might have achieved as much in the game, played at a similar standing, and maybe not just been as awed to be coached by Frank Lampard as much. So there has been a few extremities, according to the fan base. There's almost been the Mount must play at any means, which I'm not a huge backer of. I think Mount very much has merited his selection this year. And then there's been the kind of Giroud outcasting early on to then rely on him a bit later. So it's an interesting little blend. So I guess, Liam, you're maybe best poised to start this one off in terms of being around the club and sort of getting a feeling from players and coaching staff and this and the other. Man management's not something we always see in detail. So Liam, if you want to kick us off on where you think the man management's been a success, could improve, and then everybody else chime in.
Well, I think the first thing to say is this isn't the most intimidating Chelsea squad to take over, even if you're a fairly young coach. You know, it's not like Andre Villas-Boas coming into the Chelsea squad that had Lampard and Terry and, you know, those really huge names and huge personalities that practically ran the dressing room. Say the strongest personality in this Chelsea squad when Lampard took over was David Luiz, and he won that battle fairly early on. And I think that was more of a football decision than anything else. Lampard's made it very clear that he respects Luiz, and you know he obviously has affection for him based on what they achieved as teammates. But he made a judgment very early on that Luiz wasn't the right fit for the team he was trying to build. And Luiz is the type of character as well who will always say what he thinks. And so I think you have to be slightly wary with him. While he's not necessarily a bad character, he has the potential to be disruptive in certain contexts. And I think we saw that with Conte a little bit. We saw it at times before that in his Chelsea career. He's just a bit of a maverick, a bit of a free thinker. And Lampard recognised that, and I think he saw the importance of trying to establish a culture in which he was the ultimate authority early on. And he was able to do that from the very first summer. And I think one of the things that runs through this season is how little you've heard behind the scenes in terms of drama at the training ground. There's been nothing. You know, when you think about it, that's actually really unusual for a Chelsea season. There's often a training ground bust up, or on the more subtle end of things, there's often little reports that you can tell might have been briefed out of the dressing room against the manager or against something the manager's done. There's been none of that here, and that's partly because of the way Lampard's handled it, but I think it's also partly because of just who he is. And coming in, he had a greater level of affection from the average people, the average workers at Cobham, everyone at the training ground, than any manager before him, because of his pre-existing connections to the club. And everyone wants to see him succeed, and everyone feels invested in his success. So I think he's done well managing the dressing room. It hasn't been the toughest challenge, but he's handled it well. And in particular, one of the things you alluded to at the start, when you were introing this, he established early on that the players that trained best would play. And he stuck to that all season. Early on, he gave the young players a chance to establish themselves, and for as long as they merited selection, they were in the team. But you saw since the restart, Tammy Abraham's form drops off a bit. He takes a back seat. Olivier Giroud comes in and you could argue maybe saves Chelsea's season with his form. So he held true to that standard the whole season. I think that's why the older players respected him and the younger players respected him.
Dan, I know you saw the Louise move as quite an early marker being thrown down as well. And I know your view of the train well play and that almost changing week to week as maybe not the positive that Liam's kind of alluded to there.
Yeah, I disagree, Liam. I'm Dan. So I think that
how he's disagreed before he's introduced himself. Good order. Good order.
Welcome, I'm Dan. Yeah. Oh, do you know what it is? I think we've heard Lampard say across the season, Giroud's been training amazingly. We've heard him say that a lot of these players, they're training hard. The reason why they're not playing is just maybe because Tammy's been in form. And I think if you look over the stretch of the season, when particularly there have been games where we've had 2 games within a week, I don't think you can say that Giroud has only merited to come into the team towards the end of the season. I think there's been plenty of opportunities for Giroud to come in. I don't necessarily feel like it's been a meritocracy. I feel like Lampard had his idea of why Tammy starts, because maybe he presses more, and maybe he thought at this point Giroud doesn't suit my style of play. I don't think that's a meritocracy. I feel like that's preconceived ideas, and I think that Giroud has actually shown him, you know what, I can do well in a Lampard team. And so I think it's easy to say that it's been a meritocracy just because maybe, obviously, we might be, I don't want to talk on your behalf, Liam, but we might be in the Lampard camp, but I just feel like there's been plenty of opportunities for players to come in where potentially he's played his favourites. That's just the way that I view it. Now, what I'll say about Lampard's man management is there's not many players really agitating to leave. And look, we've had Mourinho as a manager, and we know he can come in, especially third season, and just light the whole place up. Everybody, you hear, Cesc wants to leave, Hazard wants to leave. There's plenty of rumours where people are agitating to get out. Actually, right now, most people are fighting to stay. Even players like Emerson, who's been on the outside, I'm hearing stories that actually, he doesn't mind staying. Maybe it's because of COVID and the kind of uncertainty of the market. But what I will say is, even though I feel like Lampard's really he's not stayed true to his promise, I disagree with Liam there, but I feel like I'll give him marks in terms of it doesn't seem like people hate it so much that they went out.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, you can see it with Giroud, can't you? Because Giroud was one of the senior players who was desperate to leave at the end of January, but it didn't become an issue with Lampard.
Yeah.
It didn't become a personality issue. And I think that's been Lampard's success, is that he has managed the relationships well, even when he's had to disappoint players. And I don't agree that he's played favourites, because we're about a month removed from Mason Mount getting hooked at half time in an FA Cup tie against Leicester. So he's been prepared to be tough on everyone. But I do think he's just not got his selection right every single week. He's made mistakes, and he's maybe not always picked the best people for certain games.
I'm going to stop you there, Liam, because that is a whole nother category, and I don't want to give away too much on there. I'm going to come round for scores just so we can get the first one ticked off. Jermaine, mate, out of 10, come down with me. I know you might not have a big white placard there ready. I was hoping someone would make one, but good effort, boys. Clearly not. Out of 10, man management, Lampard.
I'd probably give him an 8.
Cool.
I'd probably give him it quite high, mainly just because of some of the reasons the boys have just said. But I also think, like, even in terms of selection, like, there's a possibility that Tammy and Giroud are both training at the same level. You see what I'm saying? So what do you do then? It's just a matter of who he feels he needs to go with at the time. So although people might feel like, oh, he's not stuck to his promise, he probably has, but he's just decided to go the other way with some of the players. So,
Hells, out of 10?
Yeah, I got 8 as well. The kind of the -2 from the 10 is probably around the kind of players that were maybe, I don't want to say frozen out per se, but at times didn't maybe get the minutes that you would think that they were deserving of. I think the Giroud one is a little bit more interesting than maybe where we've spoken about or has been spoken about, just because of how integral he looks to the way we play now, and you kind of wonder how that's been missed, maybe. And that's why I do understand Dan's point in that regard. But like, for the duration of the season, I feel like he's done a really, really good job of kind of keeping it together and keeping the squad more or less happy, and keeping the fans happy as a result of that. I know a few of them, the American fans won't be too happy with the kind of the early Pulisic minutes, but generally speaking, I think he's done a really, really good job.
Well, and you could argue that he's thrown a gauntlet down and got performances out of that as well. Unknown Tweeds, we don't have a face, but we do have a score out of 10.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to go with 8 again. I think the interesting thing for me is that he's probably the first Chelsea manager that's actually created some kind of equality within the squad. You know, he's obviously pushed young players early on, but he's kind of pushed them to establish them while sort of still being able to keep the senior players feeling sort of senior and experienced. But he's actually sort of brought young players up to a level now where you can see that other players will count on them. And I think certainly previous managers who have kind of dropped young players in, they've always looked like young academy players playing in the first team. So I think that sort of man management of what he's done of bringing that balance between your youngsters and your senior players, that for me takes skill, and I think that's probably why he gets an 8 for me.
Cool, fair play. Liam, are we going to buck the trend of 8? So you're going to go higher, lower?
I'm stuck actually between a 7 and an 8, and the only reason why I'd probably go for a 7 is because, alluding to what I said before, I don't think this is the most difficult dressing room to manage. I think previous Chelsea managers have had much more difficult tasks. And even actually, if Eden Hazard had still been here, he's not a difficult personality in the slightest. He's a super nice guy. But he's a superstar who doesn't train very hard, doesn't particularly press, and kind of does what he wants. And he's good enough to make it work. But that would have made it more difficult for Lampard to do what he wanted to do than the challenge he's had. So I'd go 7.
Oh, and last but not least, Dan.
Yeah, Liam's made it difficult for me because I wanted to come in just under everybody. And you went to go and pick 7. So I think that I want to give him a 7 too. And the reason why I want to give him a 7 is because I think there's been periods in the season potentially where I think in the press, he's kind of been hard on the players. And look, you can be hard on the players, but I don't know. For me, I feel like, especially when we started to get our form earlier on in the season, I think when we got the news that the transfer window was open and he started to talk about other players, potentially, I think our form may have dipped, because before he kind of created a camaraderie saying, like, listen, we're banned, we're all in this together. And I think a couple of times we've seen that kind of all go to pot when the transfer ban came, when that got lifted and he started to talk about other players. And I think that's when players started to think, okay, actually, maybe I'm not as wanted. And I don't know, I feel like he could have done better. I don't feel like he done that bad, so I'll give him a 7.
Cool. So averaging out at 7.6 is a strong start for Frank the Gaffer. Maybe one that needs less deliberation, but I would argue is no less important to senior management, as Steve McLaren found when he was coined Wally with the Brolly. And I think there's a certain element to when Conte came in. Oh, look at him on the touchline there. Oh, the passion and Klopp early on. It's like, yeah, he's really uniting that fan base. And then on the flip side, there's just some things that people just strangely fawn over, like Pep reinventing the Gaffer's wardrobe, bringing out smart casual and everything like that. So I'm just going to ask for Lampard's touchline techers. And now we don't need to deliberate this one, but just how does he look there? How does he feel there? How does he handle himself there? And on a more superficial level, where does he rank between Pep's cool dad at sports day against Wenger not finding his pocket? So yeah, just going to come round. Liam, out of 10 for touchline techers from Lamps.
He certainly looks more stylish in the club shop attire than Sarri did, but that's a fairly low bar. I would say probably an 8. Are we just talking about the way he's dressed?
Well, listen, Liam, this is a podcast
the way
where you can interpret many things many ways.
Yeah.
Is it also the way he conducts himself?
I think so, because I think you do get managers like Van Gaal I think a lot of it is baseless, but he got criticised for writing notes and sitting down, you know. So I think fans do get something out of that in a stadium as well. You know, when we eventually get them back in there. So it should just round it off, really.
Yeah, well, Lampard certainly doesn't merit like his own sort of player cam like Conte did. He's got a set routine. He'll stand up, watch the action for a little bit, then he'll walk slowly back, sit down next to Jody Morris and chat to him for about a minute, and then get back up again. Occasionally he'll clap his hands a bit and ask him to play a bit faster. He doesn't really say an awful lot, which is why that whole spat with Klopp and the Liverpool bench was so entertaining. So yeah, I'll probably give him an 8, because he more for being quite a sort of stylish, stoic presence.
Jermaine, as the resident passion merchant of the podcast, a stoic presence can't be up your street, surely. 1 to 10.
Well, I'm giving him a 10 just for the Liverpool. Just for the Liverpool back. I'm Chelsea all through and through in it, and I just thought him to let him know, like, so early on, like we're not even in a position to even like really speak to Klopp like that right now. Do you know what I mean? But the fact that Lampard knows who he is and what he's done for the club, and obviously he's our gaffer at the moment, I just thought that was like probably his best highlight. And I don't think he's probably going to have a much better one than that, to be fair. But
peaking early.
I just give him a 10. But mainly, I think as well, I like the fact that he has a good bond with like the players when they score and they go over to him. And that, I think there is like a proper like togetherness with him and the squad as well. So yeah, I'll give him a 10 just for that.
Hells, he might not be doing enough chin stroking for you. I don't know.
Yeah, there's not enough deliberation. He doesn't look confused enough, I think, mind you. I'll give him a 6. I just think he's got like an air of like the Pulis tracksuit manager that I'm personally not too keen on. I'd like a little bit more Nagelsmann, a little bit more Pep, but yeah, like he's not really put a foot wrong or done anything worth noting, I'd say, bar the Liverpool game. So yeah, 6 is like my average. He just kind of goes about his business.
It's a good point on the club shop attire, because I would have always sort of had Lampard down as a suit man, but he just maybe he wants to show he's down with the kids. I don't know, and keeping the.
He doesn't want to take his boots off, mate.
That's it, isn't it? Oh, mate, the amount of time is like, pre-season's here. Lampard's in the 5-on-5 again. All right, okay, cool. Joe.
I think as Meads isn't here, I think I'm going to have to pull the resident City boy card and look at the suit. So I'm going to have to go 5. You know, I think considering Lampard has one of the best watch collections in world football, the fact that he's wearing a £120 tracksuit rather than like a £3,000 suit, yeah, like I'd like to see him work on that a little bit for next season. So
Harsh
yeah,
but fair, Joe.
5 for
Harsh
me. Yeah.
but fair. Dan.
It's always the person before me. I was coming in at the 5. I went to be lowest. But like it's weird because at Derby he was wearing a suit all season, and
Yeah.
I think if I'm correct, the first match, the United game, I think he wore a suit, but he just ditched it.
Well, I would. To be fair, if he's a superstitious man, then maybe that United game.
Maybe it was that 4-0 slapping, but yeah. Apart from that, like Liam said, he's more like routinish. He's not really like a free spirit on the touchline. So yeah, and he hasn't really had a touchline fracker, and that's that's the brand. So I can't give him more than a 5.
Okay, so rounding off there at only 6.8. So for such a young manager, you'd expect a little bit higher there. Lampard maybe underperformed. And on the next category, I'm gonna come to you first, Dan, just so you don't get sold short by whoever goes first. And again,
Okay.
I'm calling it off pitch just because it's more to do with the training ground probably. And just a few words on general player progression. So obviously our first thought's going to go to Mount, Tomori, arguably Pulisic, Tammy, Reece James, Hudson-Odoi. But I mean, good managers improve experienced players all the time as well. So I guess just in terms of developing players and in terms of improving what he has at his disposal, where'd you go with that one?
So this is developing players, not what you get out of players, but who do I think is a better player now than the start of the season? Okay, so like maybe in terms of improving players, it's difficult to tell, but what I'll say is reputation-wise, Tammy Abraham, before the start of the season, like a lot of people's questioning, is he a Premier League striker? Actually, Tammy Abraham as well, even at Aston Villa, he didn't really score goals out of the box. I know for sure, like I think I remember some interviews saying that, yeah, he actually stays behind and trains with Lampard in terms of shooting. And so, yeah, Tammy Abraham, 15 goals. He didn't even start all of the games. I think he's a big win for Lampard. Mount, again, another player where I don't think before the season people would have had him down as a Premier League player. Again, that's an improvement. Giroud, people were questioning. Don't forget, Giroud had a run of games under Sarri and he didn't score goals. He did score, like I'm talking about in the Premier League, he scored goals in Europa, but I think you can say there are a number of players, again, that he has improved. But then again, you look at Hudson-Odoi. I know he's come back from injury and I know like he's still young, but I think if we're looking at towards like at this point, I think people kind of rate him a lot less than they did at the beginning of the season. Now, the question is, do we put that on Hudson-Odoi? Do we put that on Lampard? But if it's his job to develop players, I think if you look at Hudson-Odoi, if you look at Tomori, who we talk about man management, Tomori came in, everybody became... I think actually there's a cycle where young players tend to come in and everybody say they're the best young player. So like we've seen it with Reece James. And then later on, actually, I think maybe opinion kind of comes down. So what I'll say is I think he's done well enough for a new manager. But at the same time, there's obviously going to be room for improvement.
Any contributions contrary to Dan's there?
No, I think a lot of the same really. I think he's made improvements to a lot of players individually. Certainly, like I don't know if we're going to talk about tactics and structure and stuff like that in a bit, but I think taking players.
You should know me better than that, Joseph.
I was just giving you a chance to come in and save it just in case, but no, I mean I think sort of moving from quite structured systems, certain players have improved a bit. Some players have regressed. I think sort of moving them away from more of like an instruction-based style of play. But I think I largely agree with Dan. I think certainly the guys who've come from the Championship, even us we're all super positive towards academy players in general. I think some of the performance levels have surprised even us in terms of how important they've been to the top 4 finish. So yeah, I'd go with go with I also think it's been pretty decent.
Okay, cool. I'm going to zoom around for scores on this one and throw your 2 pence in as we get there. Pels, as the probably Joe's only rival to be in the Academy Aficionado of the. To the point, Liam, by the way, in our alternative award show, which you only one who wasn't here for that, obviously, Halloumi refused to nominate someone for the Josh McEachran Award of the least likely to make it at Chelsea out of the Academy players. That's how die-hard this boy is. So, Pels, what are we saying? Player progression.
I'm sorry that I don't want to put any negative energy into anyone's career at present. For me, I think that the player progression is a little bit difficult to really assess in terms of over a season. Stylistically, would I say that many of the players have gone on leaps and bounds and changed like elements of their game? Not necessarily. I do think that the ability for them to have showcased what they can do at this stage is a good step in itself. I don't know if many people thought that, despite being a good goal scorer at championship level, based on Tammy's season at Swansea, obviously in a different system and under different circumstances, maybe people might have thought that, actually he's a mid-table type striker, or he's a top level, championship forward. So for him to be able to kind of recreate some of that form at this level is a sign of a really good step, and for him to be playing in a structure that suits him somewhat. The same with Mount. I think despite, Reece James having a bit of up and down, he's someone also that, showcased in games, especially that, Champions League game against Ajax, what he's capable of. So I think for the academy players, like I said, maybe not stylistic growth, but certainly like a maturity in their game that can be credited to Lampard. And with regards to, some of the older players, like someone like Giroud, like you mentioned, I think Zuma's grown this season, especially when you consider the big injury he had maybe 2 seasons ago. I think Zuma's emerging as probably our best centre half. But then equally, and Pulisic is one that obviously is got his best goals tally in a league season. So there are plus points, but then equally, the defenders don't look much better or look worse, if anything, than they did last season. Certainly, Kepa looks a lot worse, and I don't know if I can really attribute that to the manager. But there are bits there where you do think, actually, has he put all of them in the best place to get better, in the best place to to really, really kind of showcase their talents, and I'm not 100% sure that that's been the case for everyone. So yes, a mixed bag, but a lot of it so often is mixed, I guess.
What's your rating?
Yeah, Pels, mate, like that is classic Halloumi there, bro.
What, I've just not got to the point.
Great point.
Yeah, no, I give him a 7.
But all right, cool.
Yeah, Yas was looking for a number, really. Then,
yeah, I mean, a number would do next time, Pels. But yeah, Dan.
I forgot about Kovacic and Barkley as well. Both of these. So like, we talk about England, Barkley. We've seen Barkley for Chelsea do well. Obviously, Kovacic, he's freedom and dribbling. So I would say, yeah, I think I'd probably give him a 7 as well.
Decent. Liam?
I'd probably give him a 6. And I say that because I think he's done phenomenally well in empowering and establishing the academy boys, putting them in positions of real responsibility in key areas in attack. And Chelsea are going to reap the benefits of that for years to come. I think he managed Pulisic excellently, as much as people tried to project an agenda onto him in the first few months. He protected him after a busy summer of international football and put him in position to blossom. And now Pulisic is on a superstar trajectory at Chelsea. And he might have reached that anyway, but I think Lampard deserves credit for that. On the flip side, I don't think any of the defenders have got better. A lot of the centre-backs, I'd say all of the centre-backs, bar Zuma, look worse now. Well, Tomori obviously has just come in, but Christensen and Rudiger look worse now than they did a year ago. Kepa looks a lot worse, to the point where he is now kind of a write-off of an asset, and he was always overpriced, but now he's a huge problem for Chelsea because his confidence is just completely shattered. And
it's a good point you made there, Liam. Sorry, just to cut you. We rewatched the Europa League final, a couple of us, and even in that final, like there was some mistakes from Kepa, but you realise watching it back, he dominated the narrative and wasn't so consistently as poor anywhere close, like at all.
I think he was probably slightly below par last year, and the advanced stats would back that up. But he wasn't having the worst season in Opta's database, which is what has happened this season. And I think when you look at all of the defenders and the goalkeeper as a whole, and Caballero's had like not a great season either when he's played. I think you have to probably put that down to Lampard's system being so focused on dominating possession and playing attacking football that he's probably overexposed players that aren't capable of assuming the level of responsibility he's giving them. So splitting the difference would be 5. I'm giving him slightly more credit for the achievements with the young players than the regression defensively.
Fair.
Yes.
Speaking of Pulisic agendas, you should listen to some of our old episodes and listen to this man Dan talk, Liam. Honestly.
I'm sorry. I like to come in at the bottom rung. It's on brand. So can you change my decision?
Nah, you pick 7. You can't. There's no 2 cards in Cup Down with me. Jermaine, 1 to 10.
Yeah, I'll probably give him a 7 as well. I think he's managed same kind of players like Barkley. I think he's looked good. Probably had some of his best games for us probably this season. Kovacic, in terms of the freedom, I think mentally as well, I think Lampard's probably done wonders for some of these players. I think people always look at obviously just them playing on the pitch and in terms of what they can do with coaching and that, but I think mentally what you do for a player is key, and I think Lampard has probably had really positive effects on some of these players. Obviously, Pulisic probably being one of the main ones. But I think 7. I think 7's fair. I think 7's fair.
And then Joe?
Yeah, I'll go 7 as well.
Also averaging out at 6.8 again. This is looking very didn't score a goal on Football Manager so far for Frank Lampard. We're going to get into the real meat now, which we could be here a while, lads. So I see Liam had a mug. I hope there was caffeine in it. On the pitch now, we're going to go towards, and I think just the big one here is just team and tactics. And I think there's some sub categories after this which do relate to this slightly, but just general team and tactics in terms of setting up for games. Obviously, we've seen a lot of systems. We've seen a 4-2-3-1 that essentially looked like a 4-2-4 a lot of the time. We've seen a sort of deeper, flat 4-3-3. We've seen a 4-3-3 with Mount floating into a 10 space a lot more. We've seen 3-4-3s. We've seen diamonds in pre-season. It wasn't afraid to mix it up. Some right, some wrong, but you expect that maybe from a man still finding his way around the top end. So teams and tactics, off we go. I know people have things to get off their chest.
I'll jump in. I think that the biggest concern for me has always been for some incredible performances that we've had, the difference between the top performances we've had and some of these poor performances. For me, that's far too wide. You look at the Arsenal away performance when we switched formations, Spurs away. I think that the way we set up against City recently, those kind of performances, even the United game semi-final, then the following, in the final against Arsenal, where we kind of completely played into their hands in terms of the sort of structure of the team. So I think, the times he's got it right, it's looked really good. But I think the times that we've got it wrong, it has looked incredibly poor. And I think for me, that's the biggest thing that Lampard needs to do for next season, is having a base level performance that's a lot higher than some of the sort of formations we've seen this season. I mention it all the time, but going from that kind of super structured football from Conte, Sarri, set patterns of play, set ways of moving the ball, to almost like completely freeform at times, I don't think it's always worked. When it works, it looks fantastic, but I still think that there are players here who need more instruction, a bit more coaching, a bit more structure. So for me, if I'm going early in on a score, I would go 6.5, but we're not doing half points. So I want to go.
We don't do things in halves, Joe.
No. I don't. The thing is, I don't want to give him a 6, but I don't think it's quite a 7. So I'll go 6. It is quite low, but that's because I just think that there's so much to work on in these sort of poor performances that we've had. So yeah, 6 for me.
Cool.
Yeah,
I'll go next.
Oh,
All right, go for Livy.
yeah, I'm itching for it, mate. I think for me, I'd go 6-2. I was stuck between a 6 and a 5, to be honest. Just because I feel like there's been the level of inconsistency that we've had, rather, is down to a lot of the inconsistency of like tactical choice, of system, of personnel. I think the amount of kind of change in regards to formation in particular is something that we've kind of bared the brunt of, and we've felt the inability to really, and I guess it's difficult, and I don't mean to gloss over it, but the inability to pick the right system for the right game, in terms of just maybe a bit of copy and paste, as we've said, or the reactionary kind of set up of formation to the previous game, as opposed to the opposition that's in front of him. So we speak about like the 3-4-3 and the wins against Southampton, but then going into the wins against Tottenham, sorry, and then kind of using that same formation against Southampton, and then it not working, and us being by them and not being able to find space. And even just the start of the Arsenal game away, where we start with that formation again, and it's like this is not going to work. So we have to kind of make a change. And I think there's a lot of confusion with regards to how he gets his way or his ideals out from the training ground onto the pitch. And I think we've seen that in the amount of changes he's made, just because maybe he's not sure. There's not a lot of experience there in terms of what works. And when I compare it to someone like a Conte, I feel as though he was always fixated upon a back three of some sort. Started off the season a kind of 4-1-4-1, and has moved into the formation that he wanted. But there was a lot of consistency in terms of the ideals, and we knew exactly more or less how we were going to play every week. I don't see that kind of similar consistency and assurance in the ideals that he's got. So for me, it's a 6, just based on the kind of the difficulties and the teething issues that we've seen. It's not to say that it's awful, but it's just like Joe says, it could be a lot better.
Cool. I'll go next then. I'll go in with a hard 4, just to make sure that I stay bottom, but also I feel like...
what have you got against Lampard? Do you want to give him the lowest score for everything?
No, it's not. I haven't got anything against Lampard, but I think enough. No, it's not even that. Do you know what I think? I just feel like it's okay to admit that this is his first, or second season as a manager, first season in the Premier League. He doesn't have it all perfected. There's a lot of good things that we see, but I just feel like we don't kind of have to pretend that everything's great. So if we look at it, 12 losses. Is it 12 losses? I can't remember in the Premier League, but there's been a lot of losses. Now, also, there's been a lot of good things. So, it's like we finished top 4 because we didn't draw that many games, but we won a lot and we lost a lot. And I feel like he's still trying to, kind of what Palumi said, he's still trying to kind of translate what he wants effectively on a pitch. And I just feel like he hasn't got that yet. He hasn't settled on the system. I think coming to the Premier League, it's a difficult job already. You're a new manager. You've got a lot of new players, there's so many new kind of variables for him. I just feel like it would have been better if he was more stable in formation, in picking a defense. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like even when he was stable for a while, so I think he stuck with the 4-2-3-1 through the majority of the season. But I feel like as we can see towards the end of the season, after reflection, after lockdown, actually, I've always kind of said, and maybe it's just me trying to confirmation bias, but I've always said that Mount is better away from the number 10. And I feel like maybe he feels more open to noticing things that wasn't working. He could have seen that before the lockdown reflection. So the reason why I give him 4 is because I feel like it's not been great, but I feel like there's so much room for improvement. So I don't want it to seem like Lampard bashing. It's more that, the fact that he's out of 4 now and we can finish top 4, that's actually exciting for me.
Okay, and Liam, I'm going to come to you just for your score, but also with a question similar alluding to something Dan has said. He said he doesn't know if Lampard's able, and Palumi, able to get his vision on the pitch well. Just from being around the club and the training ground and stuff, I imagine, do you get the feeling that he's that sure of that vision himself right now? And could that be part of the reason it's not translating well, because it's not that set in stone?
I think Lampard knows the way he wants the team to play. I think he's got quite a clear idea. He wants fast, forward-thinking possession football. The amount of times I've seen him on the touchline on Chelsea's slower days, like clapping his hands and saying fast, fast, fast. Like every time they get the ball in midfield or one of the centre-backs, forward, find a forward pass. And he's been relentlessly frustrated, I think, on those days at the players' inability to do it. You can argue maybe he's not coaching that well enough, but like Joe said, I think there is quite a free-form element to the way he wants the team to play in transition. It's not all passing it's not passing circuits and, you know, preordained patterns. I think he's learning on the job, and he's also wrestling with a flakiness in this squad that existed under Conte, under Sarri, where that some days they just don't bring it. They don't bring the same level of intensity of pressing. They don't bring the same precision to their work, and that comes from the senior players. And I think, you know, on the days when the senior players don't have it, it's hard for the young players to set that standard or drag back a game that's going wrong. I do think Chelsea's game management has been poor at times. It's been late Wenger era Arsenal-esque, to be frank, at times, against Arsenal. And I think there have been problems with that. I think he's generally picked the right time to switch to 3-4-3, but then he's fallen in love with it and stuck with it too long against teams he shouldn't be playing it against. And I think overall he's probably got the tactics right more than wrong this season, and that's why Chelsea finished fourth. But he's got it wrong enough times that you still feel he has plenty of room to grow as a manager, and certainly
so what would be
his team and the way they play.
Yeah, I feel
room to grow.
12 losses there tell you how conversant the variance in that. What would you be your out of 10 there, Liam?
Sorry, I forgot I didn't.
No, it's all right. You're not as bad as Palumi was just then, so it's all right.
It would be a 6 from me.
6, okay. And Jermaine, final word?
Yeah, I think, I'd probably go about a 6 as well. But I feel like even with his teams and tactics, I think the chopping and changing hasn't helped at all. But I think there's been a lot of games as well where we have seen him get his idea across, and it's been more kind of like the players not producing, do you know what I mean? In terms of we should have killed games off very early. All of a sudden, them draws or losses are, they could possibly be wins. So I think some of these questions that have come about for Lampard as well, I think they still would have been there, but I don't think they would have been as frequent, because I don't think he might have had 12 losses, say for example, if Werner and Ziyech were maybe up front, do you know what I mean? So I don't know. I feel like he's got a lot of learning to do, but I've seen quite a clear kind of pattern in terms of his play as well a lot of the time this season.
So that's averaging out at 5.6 there for team and tactics, which I guess if you're being really numerical is almost split down the middle, but is his lowest stat to date. And I guess this plays into team and tactics in general, but I think it is something significant enough that managers do get judged on that I've made it a separate category. So we'll just run the ratings on this one, because I think a lot of this has been covered in the discussion around team and tactics more generally, but ranking for big game gaffering. So I mean, here we've got such an interesting array of ones to pick for. We've lost the double to United, but then got them back in the semi-final, and we had the Super Cup as sort of an early indication of being a brave team. We've actually played really well against Liverpool almost every time. Only 1 in 3 against Arsenal, most significantly losing a final, the biggest game of all of the big games. And then Europe hasn't been fantastic. Valencia was an early red flag. Bayern, there's an argument there that we kind of just got picked apart in, I guess, the fragility and the flakiness that Liam talked about a little bit in a 3-minute spell. But then you have had an FA Cup run as well against some big teams. So it's an interesting one here in terms of his big game management in particular. So what would your rankings be there? Jermaine, start us off. Jermaine, you're muted, mate. Sorry.
Hey, yeah. Big game gaffering. I don't know. The double over Jose is obviously a big thing, isn't it? So obviously that's great. But then there's the double from bloody Moyes. So it's like, you know what I mean? It's that still bothers me now. Like the West Ham double, you man know already. Like that kills me. So I feel like I just 6.
But hold on, is West Ham
a big game?
a big game?
Is that because it's derby? Is that what you're saying? Like a London derby? We shouldn't.
Yeah. Bro. You just don't lose that game. It's as simple as that, isn't it? You just don't lose. But I feel like big game gaffering. I'll probably give him a 6.
Of course, I forgot I was talking to Jermaine. Every game, big game for Jermaine. Pels.
I'm giving it a 5.
Short and succinct there, Pels. Sorry. It's probably my
Priority for me.
No deliberation.
Dan?
Do you know what? This is one of the ones where, and it's not because you called me out last time for trying to come at the bottom, but this is one of the ones where I actually want to give him high because I'm going to take into context that he's a new manager, and I think that he's done really, really better than I would have hoped in the big games in general. There's been so many big game wins in terms of at least we've beat every single. It feels like we've beat every single team, whether it's United, City, Tottenham. So he's given us a lot of big wins. He's gone on the FA Cup run. Even the Champions League, the only games that I've been really disappointed with is Bayern Munich. Like, we could have done better in the Valencia in the league games, but like in the league part of the Champions League. But I think just in general, I've been really impressed with Lampard in the big games. So yeah, I'm going to give him, did I give him a number? I gave him a 6 or 7. Let me go 6.
Cool. Liam?
That's your really high, Dan. That's your high.
Yeah, that says a lot about Dan, to be fair.
All that talk and he gave
I
us.
thought he was going to come
I was going
7, 8.
It was like an 8 coming or something.
I said 6 or 7. The fact that I considered 7, that's high.
Liam, where you having him for the big games in particular?
I'm actually going for 7. I think Chelsea's performances in the big games have generally been better than their record this season. Arsenal are the only team that they've been crap against 3 times. I think they were unlucky to lose to United. At least probably 2 of those defeats were slightly freakish results. They played City and Liverpool well pretty much every time they played them.
Yeah, agreed.
Which is a positive sign. And I actually don't give them much of a demerit for the Bayern tie because I think Bayern are possibly the best team in the world right now. And they played like it both times. And the second game, it's a glorified training game held 3 months after the first leg,
I didn't even watch it. I didn't watch the highlight. I don't know what happened. I cared that little. I don't care.
It's got to be one of the strangest games in Chelsea's history because it's the second leg of a tie that was already overplayed, 3-4 months after the first. It was a really strange game.
I had no interest. Rounding us out, Joe, big games.
I'm going to go 7 because I think our best performances this season came in big games. Yeah, I think Liam's point about Arsenal is irritating. Certainly the cup final because it's recent. There's a little bit of recency bias there, but yeah, I think overall 7, particularly against City and even I think Liverpool would play well this season. So yeah, 7.
6.2 average score there for Lamp. So I mean, he's outperforming the general games, which I guess is a trend there. Generally. Okay, another one that maybe we don't need to go too much into, but just how he's handled the press. So Liam, I mean, I think you're most qualified for this one, just the punt. But I guess everyone has their own views on press conferences and what they like to hear the manager of their club say, and you see the reactions to it from Pep and the fucking boss in this room to Bielsa's Excel spreadsheet to some press conferences and then Mourinho's just constant sound bites. They can really impact fans. Before we get into the rankings of press conference chat, and this is besides his famous consistency of serious point. Serious point. By the way, Liam, has that been picked up by a journalist other than just the internet? Like, is it?
Adam Hurrey, my colleague at The Athletic, he's got a fantastic Twitter thread on the Lampardian transition.
When you see it, you can never unsee it. It's at the point now where my wife, who doesn't watch football, will say he's done it again. It's mad. But I guess my question
it has to be self-aware at this point.
It has to. He
has to know now.
My personal favourite was he did all three in half a second without saying anything. That's in that thread of your colleagues there. It was outstanding. But just before we get into sort of rankings and whether people like how he does discuss things, because I know a few people here have an opinion on how he is after losses in particular. How much do you think these press conferences matter to the actual team? There's a lot said. It's a bit of a cliche now about, he sent a message to the dressing room there. And I've always been hesitant about that, in that I'd care a lot more what my coach says to me, like when I'm out the shower and on the pitch training, than what he says to the media room. But then you've got people like Mourinho, who does have a clear point he wants to make publicly almost before privately sometimes. So how much do you think, aside from fans and public, that stuff really ingrains itself into players' minds and matters to the squad in general, before we sort of discuss how Lampard's dealt with all that?
I think as far as the players go, for a manager, it's more important not to make things worse than it is to make things better with what you say in a press conference. I don't think players pay much attention unless the manager has said something that they have a problem with. If he's humiliated them or called them out, in their opinion, unjustly in public, or not defending them, I think that has potential to have a much bigger impact on the dressing room than a manager, defending his players or attacking a referee or whatever, because those kind of things are just expected. I think Lampard's generally done that pretty well. When he's challenged players, as he did with Pulisic early in the season, I think he's generally done it in a very measured, calculated way to motivate them. It's never come across as malicious, and I think he's generally probably got the reaction that he's been looking for with what he said in press conferences. You can tell he's been doing interviews for most of his adult life, because he's very, very good at giving a full paragraph and not really saying anything, which is perfect for what Chelsea want from their manager. They were stuck with Conte, who spent the last 6 months of his time lobbing grenades left and right in press conferences because he knew he was on his way out the door. And Sarri, who just had absolutely no filter. And it was fantastic for us, but just lie, Maurizio. Did you watch Callum Hudson-Odoi's England debut?
On the Sarri press conferences, I don't know, Dan and me probably are still the last remaining Sarri loyalists to a point, but I loved Sarri interviews, because he would tell you in quite good detail about why the players had fucked up, and often name them and just be like, no, he can't play there, he's not good enough. I loved it. It was amazing.
Yeah, it was fantastic for you, and it was fantastic for us as journalists. It's not great for players, and it's not what the club wants to hear. The club want to see their manager go in, be controlled, make no negative headlines, and just get out of there. And Lampard knows that. He's very good at being diplomatic in that sense. And I think he's done that well. So it depends what you're rating him on. Rating him for box office value, a la Mourinho, or rating him for doing what the club want him to do.
Well, this is where the subjectivity will come in. Jermaine, I know we've kind of talked a little bit about, especially in the later games where things were getting a bit tense, there was individual errors was the catchphrase. And it wasn't players by name, but arguably it felt a bit finger pointy and a bit, I've done what I can. Rudiger's gone for a slide tackle on the halfway line. It felt that way. Do you think that Liam's sort of, I guess, idea that the motivation of Pulisic and that has lasted all season, or do you think as things have got a bit tenser, It's maybe got a little bit more tetchy and a bit less slick.
I think so. Yeah, I think as obviously the more losses, like as the losses have started to tot up and the errors have started to increase and all of that, and even some of the style of play as well, like some of it's become a little bit predictable, and he's probably getting a bit frustrated. And I think he has definitely blamed players, but in a very, very subtle way, if that makes sense. And I think what Liam said is true. Like, if you call out a player's name, that's often the only time that they are going to probably take notice of the press conference or whatever, and then they're really going to have a problem when they go back into training the next day. My thing is, I don't think Lampard is the type of person not to call out these players in training as well. So I can't see Lampard going into training and not addressing some of these areas that Rudiger, Zuma, Christensen. I think he's that close with them. I think he should be able to tell them this. So obviously I will never know, but that's my take on him as a person. I think, I don't know, I just feel like he, with his relationship with the club and everything like that, I feel like he'll have a little bit more of, confidence to go up to these players and be like, you know what, you messed up yesterday. Whether you saw me say whatever I said in the press conference, I don't really care, but I'm telling you now, innit? Like, you messed up yesterday, so but that's what it is. So I think he's dealt with the press conferences quite well, to be honest. I feel like, are we doing scores yet?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd probably give him like an 8, because I think he gets things across very clearly. He doesn't put the club in any kind of difficult situations, but at the same time, as a player as well, as a footballer at that level, if you've made a mistake. And I think Rudiger and them, if they heard what he said, I don't think they would have been that annoyed, because if you think that you're not at fault for some of those mistakes that you're making, then you're probably just lying to yourself as well. So yeah, that's kind of where I stand on Lampard and his pressures.
So Jay's been won over by the Frank Lampard PR machine.
Slightly.
Cool. Is it me?
Yeah.
I actually might give him a 9 on this one. And I think I echo a lot of what Liam says. If I want box office, Mourinho is still local, all right? So I can still get the meltdowns in the Mourinho. I can still get the three times. I can get that for Mourinho. But also, if you remember, I can't remember his name now, the Arsenal manager, the one that got fired. Emery, right, Emery. Like,
really memorable guy, yeah.
Exactly, but just...
It was only 6 months ago, like.
I know, but my memory is trash. But just the fact that, like, he can really articulate his thoughts well. I think, like, we've had so many foreign managers, so I'm not going to play that off. I think he's really good in terms of giving the press as much as he wants them to have, not giving them more, shutting down whenever they ask for transfers. He shuts it down. There are, like, in terms of negative, the reason why I won't give it a 10 is because there have been times, particularly earlier on in the season, where it was reality check. Every single time we lost, reality check. How many reality checks? Do you remember?
Yeah, that could have been another thread there, Liam, in terms of reality check.
Yeah. And a little bit of the finger pointing you spoke about, but generally I feel like I want my manager to have everything controlled, not really give anything away. And I think that he's been a master of propaganda. He's been Goebbels, like, with propaganda in terms of feeding out the...
I don't know if we might need to put a statement out about that record.
But you know what I mean in terms of...
Yeah. I mean, okay,
very early,
all right.
Yeah, very early, he's had a script in terms of feeding out, like, almost reminding people of the situation, the context of the transfer window ban, of the young players, of all of these different things that he has. And I think everybody's been singing from the same script, and he's been doing that from the press conference. So I think that's masterful, and I'm going to give him a 9.
So is that 2 8s and a 9 from Liam, Jermaine and that?
Yeah.
I can't remember what I said, but yeah, I'd give him an 8.
Cool. And Joe?
I'm going 10. I'm going to go for the first 10. And the reason
you
it
just
is...
like seeing him talk. Like, you just
I do.
like the Lampard's here.
Yeah, it's like a mirror image, yeah. No, I think it's just the fact that he's brought this kind of calming energy to the club. And like Frank Lampard, the brand, he has all of the pundits in his pocket. I think it seems all the journalists like him. And all of the criticism that maybe could have affected the young players, certain players being out of form, dipping in and out of form, certain players not playing, I think that he doesn't get asked some of those questions because of who he is. And I think he can handle that a bit better. So I think the Lampard's been great in press conferences, but also like his personality, who he is standing in the game, means that he doesn't get asked those difficult questions. Subsequently, the younger players, the players in the squad, don't feel some of that heat, some of that narrative doesn't get built up. So I think for like being pure like defensive, deflective tactics, it's got to be a 10.
Cool, Pels.
Yeah, I'd go for 9. And that's just because kind of echoing a lot of what's been said, but the probably only negative for me is just maybe not feeling. I get the sense that he's a very self-aware and self-critical type of manager, partly based on kind of how he was as a player. But I do sense that there is like a lot of kind of inward reflection. The one thing maybe that I don't like as much is just that there perhaps are some games I would have liked for him to get out in front of and actually, maybe take a little bit of responsibility for maybe a system change or for something tactically, whereas it comes across more as, being put down typically to an individual error. And I guess sometimes that obviously that is the reason. But also I do think that maybe his influence in selections is glossed over a bit, and maybe he doesn't take as much responsibility for that as I'd probably like. But yeah, 9 is, and the kind of the high scores he's got, I feel like he's quite deserving.
But sometimes, Pels, your players are just too quiet and too short. 8.8, strong. So Lampard, for what he lacks in other stuff, can talk his way out of a lot.
And just on that, by the way, I forgot to mention, I don't know why anyone hasn't mentioned it, his first presser was flipping fantastic.
Yeah,
like,
do you know what? I remember comparing that to Solskjaer's. I remember because Solskjaer had been in a while and just talked about running and working hard, and it was just like, oh my gosh, this is a PE teacher proper. Like, this is mad. Yeah. And Lampard seemed a lot more modern, a lot more forward thinking, a lot more reflective. It was strong. I was really impressed by it. Moving into now, we've gone off the pitch a little bit, on the pitch a little bit. I think most importantly now that the season is done is the future and moving forward. So I think number one is, and I think this will tell us a lot about what Lampard is to come, is feel free to come in with your rankings just as you talk here. We're on our last few in the last straight is just his response to adversity throughout the season and how you think he's handled that, whether it be players, media, opposition, and how does that set us up?
Oof, toughy. I think on I suppose on the whole, I think he's been done pretty decent. I know Dan spoke about the narrative that we like to call it, the young players, the transfer ban, all this sort of stuff. But as like an established thing to come over, I don't really think that there are that many managers that would have come in and done similar. You can talk about people playing young players and all this sort of stuff, but you actually have to want to play them. It's not just some sort of tokenistic thing that you play him out a little bit. He really tried to force some of these guys into the team early on. He really wanted to do that. And I don't think really, looking at some of the candidates we were linked with, like Allegri and people like this, they're going to come in. Tomori's on loan, Mason Mount 7th choice, Tammy Abraham's on loan somewhere. It's basically the squad last season, just under a different manager. So I think from that perspective, and yes, I do agree with Dan that the narrative is a little bit overblown at this point because we kind of outperformed it fairly early on. But that whole context for me of them actually coming in and wanting to change the culture, make the younger players feel like they are part of the first team squad, make them feel like first team players. That for me was really significant. So if we're talking about adversity, I think he reacted well to some bad losses. The way that we just sort of kind of were fairly professional in terms of getting over the line at the end of the season. But that whole getting over it for me was massive. And I don't think there were too many managers that would have come in and done similar. So for that, I have to give him a pretty high score. I think probably an 8 from me, just on the basis that I don't think many would have come in and done similar given the situation the club we're in.
Solid. Liam?
Well, for his general handling of adversity, I think you have to score Lampard pretty highly because whenever he's asked for a response from the players, and they've needed it quite a lot this season because they've had a lot of defeats, he's generally got one. And I think he's shown that he can motivate. He's shown, as we've discussed, that he can manage the media around adversity as well, and he can communicate. He can talk his way quite skillfully out of, what could otherwise be an uncomfortable press conference. And yeah, I think that the one exception, and this goes back to press conferences as well, that you can maybe talk about, is I think the press conference he did on deadline day in January was the one that I felt struck a little bit of a Conte tone. He was clearly annoyed that they hadn't signed anyone.
And he directly referenced the Fernandes deal, didn't he?
Yeah, called him a world-class player, which was very Conte. Little did we know that Bruno Fernandes would turn out to be the greatest player in the history of fantasy football. But yeah, I mean, he was certainly went into that with a point to make. And at that point, at that stage, I thought, oh, how's this going to go? This isn't the most skillful way to play this situation. That certainly doesn't feel like classic Lampard. But he recovered quickly. That proved to be an exception. And generally, he hasn't had to face a ton of adversity internally, but the adversity that Chelsea have faced this season, he's handled very well. So I'd give him probably a 9 for that.
Cool. I'll go next. And actually, I think when I think about adversity that he's faced, I just kind of brainstormed. And one of the things that is a little bit kind of, it's difficult to understand. So like a couple of times when the opposition, basically I was going to say, do you know, like when the opposition has gone down, like Arsenal, when they've gone down, in fact, yeah, they went down to 10 men, and I think there's pressure for us to win. And like, they're down to 10 men, the pressure comes on us, we kind of have to win. So I actually thinking that that's not necessarily adversity, but there's huge pressure. And I just feel like there's been times whenever we kind of go a goal behind, where it just feels like we're definitely not coming back. And whenever that pressure is on, it just seems like, if I was to rate it throughout the season, not that many times, we haven't kind of overcome it. There have been games like Ajax where it's kind of come through. We obviously got top 4. So there has been kind of glimmers, but I just feel like I'll probably give him more of like a 6, because I feel like, forget about the narrative, as I said before. There has been times where actually like there's been a lot of pressure and we haven't kind of seemed to respond to it, and that's probably why we've had 12 losses, etc. So yes, 6.
I'd probably go quite high as well with a 9. Mainly because I look at like when he was coming into the season, and arguably probably one of our best midfielders last year, definitely towards the end of the season. It's like you come in already with him injured. You're dealing with an injury-prone Kante this season. There was already talk of Hazard leaving, who was our only, game changer, if you want. And then Kante is obviously our second world-class player, but he's injury-prone, so he's dealing with that all season. I think, blooding the youngsters through, I just feel like the adversity, just even before he took the job, was just mad. So I think the way he's dealt with it throughout the season, obviously probably could have done a little bit better in certain situations. But I think for a manager that's like so inexperienced, to get us into the top 4, to get us to a final in the FA Cup, I think we've competed against like the top teams as well, decent enough, like performances against Liverpool, Man City, stuff like that. I think there's so much to be positive about in terms of like the way Lampard's dealt with a lot of things this season as well. So I think mainly just because of his inexperience, I'll give him a high score of a 9.
I'll probably go with an 8. Similar to like kind of what has been said already with regards to the situation he came into. What he's done within that situation is fantastic. I make a point of it, but when Joe said we get top 4, I cried my eyes out, like so much. laughter because I just didn't believe it. I couldn't envisage a season where we'd end up where we did, basically. And I think that he deserves a huge amount of credit for that because there was a lot of kind of things working against him in that sense. On the flip side, though, I do think low block, and I don't think that's necessarily on him per se, but more so when it gets to kind of the second game. So, you know, we've seen it in one and we've seen that we can't break down the team. Actually, when we go into the next game and we're presented with the same problem, have we been able to kind of to solve that issue and solve that problem? And part of that will be down to kind of player quality and the attacking talent at his disposal. But I know Liam alluded to kind of how well he coaches it, which is something we'll not necessarily have an insight to. But I do feel as though there are moments where our football is meant to look like something and it regresses to something else. And I do think that inability to really solve those problems is probably why we lost a number of games, or we got sucker punched in the way that we did against you kind of Bournemouths and against your West Hams. And the other kind of bit of adversity that I feel like maybe he didn't deal that well with is the kind of defensive issues. I think they were present from quite early on. I think from pre-season we said on here that, you know, set pieces were maybe something we should be a little bit worried about. The kind of manic pressing and the amount of spaces that would be opened up from the pressing, and I think to some extent he dealt with the kind of line of engagement in terms of pressing. But when it comes to the real defensive organisation, we've really struggled with that. And we've shown that we can do it. So we've shown in the City games that we can do it. So for me, that inability to really get them defending well and get them engaged and active in their defending throughout the course of the season. Yes, we can say we don't have, you know, the best defenders, but as I said, like Liam said earlier, you know, a lot of defenders weren't worse. And that's a bit of adversity that I feel as though, you know, he could have dealt a lot better with.
Fair.
So yeah, 8 still. I think that's an 8.
I mean, to be fair, you said 8 and then you've listed loads of good reasons about why it should probably be a 6, but I'm going to go with 8 anyway. We're coming to the end now, and it's the last 2, and I think these really will define kind of his tenure here, and whether it's another year and good squad building, we'll give it to the reins to someone else, or if it could be a real long-term appointment. And with this one, I think we're maybe going to discuss a bit less because there's less places to go with it. So if you want to just roll through with your ratings and then a short little contribution as to why, I think that'll be interesting. It could be new signings that we've been reported. He's had a hand in, quite an influential hand, and especially in contrast to the Conte summer, the notorious Conte summer of little to no value. Or it could be current players that he's chosen, not chosen, etc. And I think that's just player taste. I think a lot of managers do get defined by this. Conte just liked experienced workers who could follow instruction, and Sarri seemed to want players who, as well as the pattern play, could open some things up. And I think that will go a long way to deciding how effective the Lampard sort of idea of wanting to play is. So just a quick little run round. Joe, player taste for Lampard.
Yeah, I really like it. I like the players we're linked to. I like players who signed. If they get Havertz over the line, probably better than Hazard these days. If they get Havertz over the line, then that sort of attack next season is beginning to look quite tasty. You can see what he's after. You know, Pulisic, pace, getting behind players. Werner, the same, great finisher. Havertz, the guy to unlock the doors. You know, Ziyech is just world-class sort of playmaker from out wide. Needs to drastically look at the defensive situation, but the names have been linked to maybe beyond Chilwell, I'm quite happy with. But he seems to have a sort of decent idea for me of what kind of players would be successful in the Premier League and beyond that. So yeah, for me, if we get the signings that we're sort of being linked to, especially a bit more on the defensive side, probably a 9 for me. I quite like the direction. So yeah, I'll go 9.
Can I just say, Joe, that is like such a low blow and cheap shot from you about Havertz and Hazard. I've not got any time for that.
I'm so glad you said that, Pels. I'm
Bro,
so
that's
glad
so
you said that.
disgusting.
I'm so
How dare
glad
you?
you said that. That was absolutely outrageous.
I think Havertz scored more goals for Bayern in like one half of football than Hazard did this season for Madrid.
Yes,
But I'm just putting it out there. But
Is this what we're doing, Joe? What's going on
This
here?
man's giving you a lot of happiness, Joe. I don't think this is really necessary.
Yes, I've moved on mentally. I've moved on now.
There's moving on. No, but I don't think you have moved on by the sound of it.
Another aggressive shout for Joe, yeah.
I don't speak about my exes like this that I've actually moved on from. You know them ones. It's the ones that I still have a bit of bitterness that I speak about like this.
I still
Bro,
resign.
you need to sort that out, Joe. I mean, aside from that cheap shot, to be fair, I do agree with a lot of what Joe said. I'm also opposed to the Chilwell signing. But with regards to kind of the taste, I guess the only thing around taste that I'd be a little bit concerned about is maybe the players that have played when everyone is available. And I just think, you know, I understand to some extent why Alonso plays, but then at the same time, not a massive fan of it. And would argue that maybe that I'd probably play it Aspi left and Reece James right.
Yeah, but he's tall, Pels.
But yeah, I'd say that eight is near enough solid for me.
Liam, I will give you a choice. You can either give us a score or a transfer exclusive. Which one would you like to go with?
I think I'll give you a score. I'll give you a score tonight.
Got to try. You don't buy a ticket, you don't win the raffle.
No, I respect the hustle. Don't worry. So I'd give him an 8 as well. I think Lampard certainly got an eye for an attacking player, given the ones that they've already signed and Havertz. You know, they're being linked almost exclusively with very sexy young attacking targets. And I do like the idea of Declan Rice as well, partly because I think it speaks to a personality element that is a little bit lacking from the current Chelsea squad. You can see that Rice has a real presence about him on the pitch for a guy such a young age. And I do think he'd be really good at Chelsea. I'm not sure that deal will happen this summer, though, because West Ham really don't like Chelsea and they don't like selling to Chelsea, and particularly to Lampard. So we'll see. But I think he's good at identifying at least attacking players, and Chelsea are being linked with a far more promising bracket of player than they were a year or two ago. So a good solid 8 there.
I hadn't quite considered, Liam, that in signing the deal for Rice to ever join Chelsea, they'd probably have to engage with or look at a very sobering reminder of how those deals can backfire. I hadn't really considered that fact. But yeah, I mean, we'll see if Declan Rice's social media campaign to pick me, please, Chelsea will come to any success. Dan, how are we feeling 1 to 10?
I'm deliberating between 7 or 8. I love the signings. They are attacking signings, but he hasn't made any defensive signings for me to even kind of question that yet. Obviously, we're linked with Chilwell, but one thing I do like about Lampard as well is he doesn't seem like he's crowdsourcing information. Like, it seems really like Rice, all Chelsea fans are on board with now, but he's been pushing this, it seems, for like before Rice was good. So that shows you strong identification, not just picking who the flavour of the month is, but actually I like this player. And that's been the same with Chilwell as well. So I respect it, because rather than just going after every single, so everybody's in for Sancho. We could have just gone in for Sancho, but he seems to pick unique talent. So I like that. Again, with Twomey, I agree in terms of maybe I haven't agreed with his team selections, but in terms of transfer picks, I like it. So that's why I'll go with an 8. I'll go with 8.
Yeah, I'll probably go with a 9, because I think his attacking options, like his attacking signings and who's been linked with and stuff, is obviously they've been, I think, top draw so far. If the Oblak link is true and that comes from Lampard's mouth as well, then I think that just shows that he just hasn't lost that kind of mentality to just want to be the best in every area possible. So like, he wants the best keeper like out there at the moment, and I think Oblak is that guy as well. So if that's true, that's just that would obviously be a really good signing as well. But I think one thing that I'm impressed with as well is that he could have kind of stuck to a lot of the teams that Chelsea have had in terms of, like, if you look at the strikers that we've had, I don't think we've ever had a striker like Werner. And I think him showing that he's willing to go like more towards how football is now in terms of with the signings, I think that's a fantastic sign as well. So yeah, I'm really impressed with who we've been linked with and who we've signed so far. So yeah, 9 from me.
Solid 8.4 return for player taste. And just rounding up, like I said, the players will very much dictate what or how Lampard's vision will come to pass. I think you can't really escape that. But just on the final one, he's rating this Lampard vision for the club. So I think there's been mention of a 3-year plan. It's a bit unclear if we're in year 1 of that now, or that's just starting now that he's able to exercise freely without a transfer ban. And there clearly seems to be some sort of plan that's been reported or leaked or whispered about. So I guess it's just rating what you've seen so far, and where you think that vision will get to, and how ambitious you think it is, how realistic you think it is, and just balancing those off. So I'm going to start with Pels, just because, Pels, you've been outspoken at different points about just not really liking how the team have played sometimes, and it may be starting great but deteriorating into something else. This will be the last point, so yeah, get whatever off your chest, because score's going to get averaged out soon. So if you've got to stick a last little dig in, do so now. But yeah, vision for the club, how realistic and ambitious, both in the same sort of realm.
I think the vision is admirable. It's something that, like, I think a lot of us have wanted for a while in terms of the alignment between the kind of academy and the first team. I think there was a piece a few months ago just about how the kind of transfer strategy works and how aligned they are in that regard. And to me, where we look like we're going with regards to the signings, and where Lampard looks like he's going in my head with regards to kind of tactically, I think we're in a good way. It is ambitious. I think that the combination of young talent from the academy and star signings is ambitious in that how long do you really kind of keep blooding the youngsters when the pressure kind of gets on you for the amount of signings you've made and the value on those signings. And I think that's where I think the ambitiousness is, that ability to really balance it and mesh it together. It's something that I'm on board with and I'm a big fan of. I hope that it works, and I hope that he's able to integrate the new signings and continuously integrate the new players, young players. I think maybe part of that is down to the fact that our squad at times has been down to the bare bones. And when it's not, will the likes of Billy Gilmore, obviously he's injured, but players of that nature and in that status in the squad, will they continue to kind of get the minutes that they've had this year? For me, it's like I said, it's a good plan, and I'm definitely a fan of it. I just, it's almost like I'm waiting to kind of see what it looks like this season with regards to kind of the attacking talent and the players that he signs, to see just how far we can really go. And it might be difficult to really put that pressure on him in the second season, but I think that is the kind of state of play, and that's what he's under now with the signings that he's making and with the signings that it looks like we're going to make, come October 5th. So for me, yeah, I give it an 8. More or less happy. My real question marks are around tactics, but to be honest, I don't think I can really say much about that until the signings are here and we're playing a few games next season.
Joe, I know you wrote a piece a little while ago, kind of mapping out how you would like to look a few years from now. Can't remember exact timelines, but that might be placing you sort of around now or a year from now. So how much do you think this sort of Lampard vision would align with what you would want as a fan?
Yeah, for me, I've always been sort of fascinated by that whole Zidane and Pavon's concept that Real Madrid had for a long, long time, about trying to buy the best players they can and supplementing them with their pretty decent academy. So I think this season is certainly the first step towards that. I'm kind of with Pels in that I'm kind of waiting to reserve judgment. I think this season's been fine. Finished top 4, established a foundation. I think he's legitimised a lot of the younger players as proper players in the squad. If you can continue to try and feed 1 or 2 in, I know Ajax have this sort of goal of trying to get 2 players in every 3 seasons into their first team squad. If you can push for something like that and then still, maintain that you're trying to at least compete for the better talent that we can, then I do like the direction. Strictly on the philosophy, I mean, for me, it's probably a 9 or 10. Just because I think that this is the direction that keeps the club competitive. We've got probably one of the best academies in Europe still in terms of bringing through players, bringing through talent. If you've got a manager who can legitimise them, make them first team players, then that means you can go and spend your 80 millions on your Havertzes and whoever in the future. So like from a financial perspective, from a player development standpoint, that whole holistic view of how to develop a club, for me, it's probably a 9. The execution side of it, how we play, the style of play and all that for me has to start developing next season. But if we're talking about the foundations year 1, then I'm super, super happy with what I've seen. So I'd probably go over 9, strong 9 there, yeah.
Solid. Fellas, chime in as you see fit for this one.
Yeah, I'd probably go quite high as well with a 9. I think ambition-wise, I think I said just when I was talking about the transfers, like his vision in terms of how he wants us to play, I think is again very different to what we've seen of the past, like Chelsea teams and the way we've won titles. And I think Lampard wants to win it in a kind of very like sexy football kind of way. I think he does want to play like attractive football. He wants to have the best players in the team, but he also wants the youth from the academy to be a big part of Chelsea winning the title as well. And I think I would like to think that that's his dream in terms of having 7 or 8 squad members that are all from the youth academy lifting the title and having like a decent kind of contribution to winning the title. Whereas in the past, you've seen players like Loftus-Cheek, get a medal, but they've probably kicked the ball for like 5 minutes. Do you know what I mean? So I think Lampard's working hard towards doing that. And I think generally he just wants to see Chelsea dominate everything. I don't think he just wants to see us dominate the league. I think he wants to see us dominate everything. And I think he's showing signs of wanting to do that. So yeah, I'd give him a 9 in terms of vision.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I like what Joe was saying. I was thinking about it before. I'm not just taking your point, but I feel like I split it up into vision and execution. And I think vision-wise, I believe not just vision, but also like the determination to make that vision come true. I see in his eyes that he wants to make Chelsea great again. He wants to put us back to the days where where we were winning, where we'd go into the Champions League trying to win it, knowing that we'll get to the semi-finals. And you can see how ambitious he is in the market, that he's doing a lot to get there. And I love that. I love that side of it. In terms of the execution, I just understand he's a new manager. And I believe in 10 years, Lampard will look back and say, oh, actually, I didn't know as much as I thought back then. So I'm happy with Lampard just because he's unified the fan base. I think he's got the right vision as well. And I think he'll try and move hell and earth to try and get us back to the top. And as a Chelsea fan, how do I argue with that? Whether he'll be able to do it or not, I'm not sure. But I'm here for the ride. Did I give a number? I'll go 8.
I think the ambition of it is a 10. Chelsea haven't tried to buy the most coveted young player in Europe, which Havertz arguably is, along with Jadon Sancho, since Eden Hazard in 2012. They haven't been shopping in those aisles. Mm-hmm. And I think it's been a while since they've had the aspiration to build the best team in Europe. They've been trying to do things smartly. They've been trying to, spend what they bring in terms of sales and trying to sort of game the system because they knew they couldn't match City and PSG. Now they have a different model where Lampard's aiming for everything. He's aiming to sign the best young players in Europe. He's aiming to establish academy players, and he's aiming to play a really expansive style of football, maybe too expansive at times. So we'll see how well it's executed. I think for ambition and for vision, I think you have to give it a 10. But for Lampard as a young coach, his lack of experience will not spare him the pressure next season. It's coming. Next season's going to be a proper introduction to the Chelsea job. This was a unique set of circumstances where the best player's gone, there's a transfer ban. You know, it was, those circumstances made his job more difficult, but they also provided a bit of protection that won't exist next season. And so he has to show development. He has to sort out the defensive half of this team. If they concede as many goals next year, for all the attacking talent they've got, he's far from certain to see year 3. But if he does show progress on that end, they are able to play exciting football and close the gap on Man City and Liverpool and look like they're building towards being Champions League contenders again, then I think he's achieving everything he set out to do.
Fantastic. And I think the results are in, and I've been on my calculator doing my year 2 maths that I haven't had to do in a long time because I don't need it in my day job of coaching. But just a quick one, Liam, just you alluded to as the final point of the pod, that they're prepared now to spend again. And we agree with you. We've said that Ziyech is almost the most creative player since Hazard that we've signed. And Havertz is by far the biggest coup, if it does come off finally, that the club will have got in 8 years now. So what is the change that has caused this? I mean, you could put it down to Lampard partly, but surely as much good faith as he has around the club, surely a one-year experienced manager isn't the one that you unanimously back just with all these funds. So what is it in particular, do you think, or has there any been whispers around that has made them decide, you know what, this is the year, we're going to splash, we're going to be ambitious, we're going to be quite cutthroat with deals like the Werner deal? What's changed this year compared to the Conte years, for example?
I think the stars have aligned for this in ways that Chelsea planned for and in ways that they could never have seen coming. So I think they were always intending for this to be a key window, having been prevented from spending last summer and having deliberately kept their powder dry in January because they didn't see the players they wanted available. They always intended to spend, but then the pandemic happens and suddenly the transfer market is in a place where if you don't have a billionaire benefactor or an oil state owning you and bankrolling you, you are not in a position to spend big generally. You can even see Man United, the financial powerhouse they've been over the last 20 years, having to think long and hard about whether they can spend 120 million euros on Jadon Sancho because everyone is feeling the pinch from this. And financial fair play has been relaxed for a year, which means really for the first time since the mid-2000s, the only limit on what Abramovich can spend is the limit he sets for himself. Now, I still don't think he's going to bankroll the kind of net spend that we saw in 2003, 2004, when he was first building his team, partly because Chelsea are building from a higher base now. But they see a unique opportunity to get maybe a higher caliber of player than they could have before because there's less competition. In a normal summer, Kai Havertz could have his pick. And, Real Madrid might be higher on his wish list, or Barcelona. Those clubs are out of the equation now, and you don't know how long that's going to be for. So Chelsea sense that the time for them to strike is now, and that is partly why you're seeing them be so aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a great point there about the sort of different circumstances that different clubs have financially. And I know, I don't know if he's at the Times, but Matthew Said, the resident Roman Abramovich hater to end all Roman Abramovich haters, won't be happy with me saying it. Maybe it's not politically correct, but thank God for our oligarch this summer, eh? Results are in, and I can reveal that based off of all of this. This is unarguable, by the way. You can't argue it because it's numbers, which means it's fact, which means it's science, which means it's true. So off the pitch, Lampard coming in at a 7.7, including things like player development, man management, press conferences. On the pitch, 6.2. So I think this is alluding to where I think all fans know that we do need to improve next year. And Liam makes a great point about next year is a real Chelsea job. Future, 8.8. So I think that's where it is brightest. And it's just about whether or not that can that can really come true. And I think we have seen glimpses of that this year in certain performances, as well as the ambition with the transfers and everything like that. And these all round off to, ironically, with me not doing any half scores, round up to a 7.5, which I think, as all of the boys on the pod have alluded to, is I think way above par for what kind of we expected from someone who was 1 year out of into management, transfer ban, Palumi laughing at Joe, which I will never get tired of referencing, and I don't think Joe will ever get tired of hearing about, to be honest, because it was a good way to be proven right. But yeah, so I think it's been a really good chat, and I think just this structure's made us think about all the little tidbits in which Lampard has done really, really well and maybe struggled a little bit. Boys, can't thank you enough for your time. It's been really, really good to look back on the season. Everybody listening, next week, same as there is no season, but there is still content. There is still Chelsea to cover. So, boys, thanks so much for your time. Liam, especially, thanks very much for coming on. You're more than welcome whenever you want to come on and drop that exclusive that, you know, you just shy a bit of. You know, it's quiet season. It's not quite rolling. It's not October yet, but let me know, mate. You've got our email and stuff, so that's fine. Boys, thanks so much. Been a pleasure as always, and I will see you all next week on another edition of Chessy Hour.
Cheers, gents.
Nice one, boys.
Yeah.
Cheers, guys.
Coming on, mate. Really appreciate
Thanks, Liam. Really appreciate it, mate.
No, pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
No problem.
thanks.
Cheers, guys.
it. Yeah, take care, guys. See you in a bit. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
When I spit bars in a rave, man, I go hard like Santan.